Nous, à la Caisse de dépôt et de placement du Québec, on travaille pour avoir un portefeuille net d'ici 2050. Nous avons été le premier investisseur ou un des premiers investisseurs institutionnels au monde à prendre cet engagement-là. On est reconnu à travers le monde comme étant le ou l'un des vraiment top leaders en matière d'investissement durable dans le monde. On a reçu l'an passé, on a terminé premier du World Benchmarking Alliance sur la question de l'investissement durable. On a été reconnu comme le fonds de placement de l'année, notamment à cause de notre leadership sur cette fonction. Where does that belong? Where does that come from? Why are we so ambitious? Why do we believe that an institutional investors like us has a big role to play in the transition, has a big role to play in making sure that we get to a more sustainable world? Well, it comes from a lot from actually the mandate that we have. We have a dual mandate. We have a mandate to depositors, our depositors. We have 46 depositors affiliated with the government of Quebec, insurance plans, pension plans, and all of that. Like 6 million Quebecers are expecting us to provide a pension when they retire. But also, we have the dual mandate. The second mandate for us is actually the contribution to the economic development of Quebec. And that's probably where it comes from. We have, in the morning, when we wake up, we think about our depositors and also about Quebec and how can we do more in Quebec to help and making sure that we believe in the fact that having strong communities will all make us stronger in Canada and in Quebec, where we are mostly active in that sense. We invest in 60 countries of the world. We have close to $100 billion of our assets, close to a quarter of our assets that is invested here in Canada. And we actually have $48 billion of our assets that are green. We have a quarter of our assets that are aligned with the certification of SBTI. That means that they respect the transition certification and the likes. So we are working a lot to make sure that the capital we deploy is constructive. That's our tagline. We are working a lot to make sure that capital gets more aligned with sustainable development. Andrea, it was interesting what Andrea and Jean-Marc, what they said, and Andrea, when she said, are we set in our old ways of looking at the world? What needs to be done has never been done before. We need to move capital like we've never done before. Take any numbers. On average, it's 6 times more than what we're doing now. In some areas of sustainability of the SDGs, it's bigger. If you take outside of climate, it's even more that we have to move, both domestically and internationally. When I was appointed by Prime Minister Trudeau to be your ambassador to the UN, I had my first meeting with the Secretary General then, Ban Ki-moon. I sat down. It was a very surprising choice to be at the UN because I came from the private sector. So he said, Ambassador Blanchard, you come from the private sector. We're very happy to see you because we have a big task ahead of us. We've just agreed on the Paris Accord. We've just agreed on the SDGs. And we will need to move yearly, probably, more than $7 trillion of investment around the world to do that, to achieve our goals. And we're so far from the goal. And he says, in this building, they only talk about 150 billion of that. Everybody quarrels around overseas development assistance. And clearly, this is not the answer. We need 7,000 billion, and the countries of the world are talking about 150 billion. We need to fill the gap. And when I came back to the mission, and I said that I thought I had a great, he said, you need to change the conversation at the UN on that. And that it could be a good role for Canada. And I was so happy, you meet the Secretary General for the first time and he gives you a mandate. I mean, how better can it be? I arrived at my mission, they all looked at me with depressed faces. They said, Marc-André, are you crazy? This will make us so unpopular because you're going to talk about the private sector at the UN. It's never been done before. Well, fast forward 5 years later, 4.5 years later when I left, I was the co-chair at the request of Antonio Guterres of the summit in the middle of the opening of the General Assembly at the summit for a discussion between the private sector and the UN. And everybody was fighting to get in. And fast forward a few years later, I was at the UN at the same summit. That was 4 years later this year. And the last time I was co-chairing it, now I was called as an expert and someone who had money in his pocket. And you know, it had changed completely. People were talking about blended finance as if it was the most mainstream thing. And the BlackRock people, as of the UN agencies people, as anybody in between. And we're not there yet. The money is not moving any near as fast as it needs to move. But we all need to do it together. And it's by trying new ways and not being set in our old ways, as Andrea said. I'll give you 2 examples where my fund has been, my institution has been very active. The RAM. Who knows about the RAM? Anybody knows about the RAM? You should go and visit Montreal and take a ride between Montreal downtown to the South Shore. It's a wonderful, it's a fantastic thing. But who would have thought, 3 minutes, please. Who would have thought that, 10 years ago, that an institutional investors like CDPQ would have designed, developed, built, operate a light rail train. 67 kilometers of light rail train around Montreal, the longest light rail train in the world in operation. We did that because there was trust. There was trust between the CDPQ, the Government of Quebec, the City of Montreal, the Government of Canada, Hydro-Quebec, the municipalities that it goes through, and all other communities. And we did that. We did that in 6 years, I think. And it's contributing to reduce the carbon footprint of Montreal. It's an inclusive way of transportation. It's something that helps to the density of housing along the way. It's a very positive infrastructure. And that's not the usual role of an institutional investor to do that. But we did that, but it took some trust between the parties. It took about thinking about it differently. And this is what we need to do together. Think about things differently. The other project we're talking about at the moment is transforming the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal and making it as first-class student housing facility. We're looking at the feasibility of that. But that will need also, again, we'll need to think about creative thinking. And the private sector is not used to work with the government. The private sector is not used to work with the philanthropy. The private sector is not used to work with nonprofit, and vice versa. The government doesn't know most time how to deal with us. The NGOs, not really. And we all need to get to work together. For me, the issue is trust. And at a time where we have populism, trust is difficult to get. And we all need to work to change course on that. And when I became CEO of one of Canada's national law firm, there was a client who told me, Marc-André, remember to always put yourself in the shoes in front of you when you're going to be managing your partners and all of that. That was the best piece of advice. The capital, there's many sources of capital. We all have different expectation requirements. We have a fiduciary duty. At CDPQ, 6 million people are expecting us to provide a pension. We have to look at our returns. On the other hand, that has not prevented us from making choices that is for a better alignment of capital with the constructive capital and sustainable development. So let's all think about how we can get there together faster. Let's all think about how we can scale up blended finance this way, but let's make sure we all think differently about risk. There's a risk in not doing anything. There's a risk with the status quo. And that's all of us, not only the private sector, but governments, NGOs, communities, everyone. We all need to assess the risk differently than what we've done. I really, really thank you for listening to me. It's been a privilege to be here. Thank you.